have a confession. I've had the Steam Deck for about 2 years, and it took me way too long to realize I was approaching it completely wrong. You know how your parents warn you not to do something because they had to learn the hard way and you do it anyway, and then later you think, I probably should have listened. That was me with the Steam Deck. So here's a confession of the mistakes I made with my Steam Deck, so you don't have to. So the Steam Deck is my favorite way to game. At this point, I've built an experience that's completely tailored to how I like to play. But getting here wasn't exactly seamless. I know what it's like. You're really excited about a new piece of tech and it's easy to get carried away. You start making choices that feel smart in the moment. You're convinced that you're preparing or optimizing or future-proofing, a term us tech nerds are all obsessed with. And sometimes that's true, and then sometimes not so much. So in this video, I'm breaking down the mistakes that I made in my Steam Deck journey in hopes of saving you from making the same ones and sparing a little unnecessary frustration along the way. Let's get into it. If you saw my Steam Deck setup guide, you probably saw me rattle off like a dozen different Decky plugins, and I think that they are wonderful additions that can take the Steam Deck from simple to fully equipped. And don't get me wrong, I think the ones that I recommended are great, but it wasn't until I spent time with the Legion Go S that this really clicked for me. Because when I switched devices, I didn't immediately miss all of the stuff that I added to the Steam Deck. And that's when I realized I don't want this whole suite of plugins. I just want the ones that make the experience better. For me, that's stuff like Storage Cleaner, which, rest in peace, brother, I am never uninstalling you. I'm sorry if you tried installing that after watching that video. I was completely unaware that it's not supported or available for download in the Decky store anymore. Thank you to the buds who pointed that out in the comments, I appreciate that. But yeah, Storage Cleaner, Magic Pods, Animation Changer, HLTB, ProtonDB, SteamGridDB, anything ending with a B. No, that's it. That's the list. But at one point, I had way more than that. Menus inside menus, and the more I installed, the more I saw diminishing returns. And the more I added, the more fragile the whole setup felt, because the more plugins you stack, the higher the risk a SteamOS update ends up breaking something, and suddenly you're disabling Decky altogether just to play your games, which is not a vibe.
Bro, I'm straight up not having a good time.
So yeah, customization is great, but only up to the point where it starts getting in the way. As the old saying goes, sometimes less is more. Another mistake I made was cheaping out on accessories, and the worst offender by far was cables. I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten my Steam Deck charger at home and pulled out my backup cable out of my bag feeling responsible, only to find out that it wasn't charging my Steam Deck. No lightning bolt, and me unplugging and plugging in like that was gonna help. And it turns out a lot of cheap USB-C cables will charge something, just not a Steam Deck. Which brings me to the sponsor of today's video, LTT Store. I've been using the TrueSpec cables from LTTstore.com, the merch store from the team at Linus Tech Tips, and what I like about them is that there's no guesswork involved. You don't have to sit there squinting at a product page like, will this actually charge my Steam Deck? They're very clear about the power and data capabilities, which is something USB-C desperately needs more of. They also come in a wide range of lengths, and I appreciate that variety. Whether it's at your desk, charging at the couch, or something that lives in a bag, grabbing the right length means you're not dealing with extra cable everywhere or stretching something that was never meant to reach. And we have all been there. They're built with silicone sheathing, so they're flexible, durable, and don't fight you when you coil them up. And a small detail that I really appreciate, they have built-in Velcro straps, so when you're done, you can wrap them cleanly instead of shoving them loose into a bag or doing that little knot thing that we subconsciously hope isn't destroying the cable, but deep down know it really is. Ask me how I know. At this point, I just want the stuff around my Steam Deck to work reliably without adding friction, and these do. So if you're tired of rolling the dice on cables, check out the TrueSpec cables at LTTstore.com. Huge shout out to LTT Store for sponsoring this video. Once I stopped treating accessories like disposable add-ons, a lot of that friction disappeared. And that wasn't just limited to cables. I've also tried cheap cases that just didn't fit or feel right, and screen protectors that somehow made the display worse, and things that just felt like a good deal until they were getting in between me and actually enjoying the device. The way I look at it is that if I use this device every single day, why am I treating the stuff around it like it's temporary?
You've got a point there.
In the end, buying cheap in the beginning didn't save me any money. It just made me buy everything twice. Now, on the subject of saving money, another mistake I made was completely losing my mind during the Steam sales. For reference, when I got my OLED back in 2023, I had maybe a touch over like a dozen games in my Steam library. I wasn't a big Steam player. Fast forward to today, and I'm sitting at 282. This sounds impressive until you realize that this number is largely due to this scenario. oh, it's on sale. Nah, I don't need it. But I wonder how it plays on the deck. And if you've ever stepped foot into the Steam store during one of those big seasonal sales, I know you know the feeling. Yes, the Steam Deck makes games portable. Love it. It also has the tendency to make you start justifying your purchases. Just like the words Black Friday, the psychology of the word sale is a very powerful thing. There's a big difference between seeing a game for $29.99 and then seeing a game for $59.99 violently crossed out with the number $29.99 sitting next to it like it's doing you a favor. Now, part of this habit came from me trying to move away from subscription services like PlayStation Plus and Xbox Game Pass. I like the idea of owning my library and knowing that they're there when I want them. That part actually is really nice. But the trade-off is you look at your library and you realize you spent hundreds of dollars on games you've barely touched. That's travel money. That's why is my electric bill so high this month money. That's Starbucks and avocado toast we millennials could be buying money.
They look expensive.
And the worst part isn't even the money. It's the pressure. You open your library and instead of feeling excited, you feel overwhelmed. The paradox of choice kicks in and you ultimately end up playing nothing. At some point, we have to realize these sales aren't rare. They always come back. And the older I get, the more comfortable I am waiting. Now, I really try to buy games when I'm ready to play them, not because they're cheap or they might be perfect on the deck someday. As it turns out, patience is the real discount. Now, this one took me a while to notice because everything I was doing felt reasonable. I'd sit down to play and immediately start adjusting things. Graphics settings, performance limits, frame caps, a quick tweak here, a small adjustment there. But over time, a pattern started to form. I'd boot up a game, spend 10 or 15 minutes dialing things in, play for a bit, and then get bored and fire up a different game and repeat the process. My quick gaming sesh turned into prep work, and prep work ended up turning into habit. It stopped being something I picked up without thinking and started becoming something I needed to manage. And I think a lot of this had to do with not understanding the Steam Deck's limitations and playing to its strengths. I touched on this in that Steam Deck setup guide video. So I stopped chasing numbers and instead focus on how things feel. When I'm shopping for games, I choose the ones that play nicely with the hardware instead of fighting it. And for the ones that don't, I stream. And almost immediately, I started playing more. There's far less adjusting, far less second guessing, and more time enjoying the thing that I sat down to use. And this leads me to the last mistake I made was a simple one. I stopped appreciating the Steam Deck for what it already was. After a while, it's easy to start looking sideways. More power, bigger screens, faster hardware, newer, shinier, promises more. And none of that curiosity is bad. I've tried other devices and I own other devices. I've enjoyed them and they do impressive things. But every time, I come back to the Steam Deck. And that's not because it wins on paper, but rather because it fits. The way it feels like a companion. It's kind of like choosing Mario in Mario Kart. There are objectively better racers, but you can never go wrong with balance. Somewhere along the way, I started focusing on what the Steam Deck wasn't instead of what it consistently provides for me. A comfortable, reliable way to play games without friction or ceremony. And that perspective really only came back once I stepped away. I don't expect it to be something it was never trying to be, and in return, it does exactly what I need. So, in the end, the final mistake wasn't buying the wrong thing or tweaking too much or chasing deals. It was forgetting why the Steam Deck worked for me in the first place.
He's gotta go down. Overkill.